God, what are you doing? Why would you allow a choice servant to die? Why would you allow my mentor, my leader, to die? Immediately those questions begin to rise. How inexplicable, how unexpected this must have been to these poor followers. What a jolt to their world to see the stains of His blood where once had been their hero. These disciples in distress remind us to be ready for trials, because many times they come without any rhyme or reason. There are times when trials come into life and there is no precursor, there is no predicting them. They just come without any explanation, almost as if God has lost control of the universe and things have gone crazy. Things begin to crash into our world. Trials come. They're sadly inevitable, and many times they're inexplicable. You ever ask why? I have. I have. I've looked up at heaven and said, are you still there? Are you still occupying the very sovereign throne that I've heard that you occupy? I've asked why. You see, we need to be ready for trials because sometimes there is no explanation. You ever read the book of Job? Did you catch on to the fact God never answered the question, why? Sometimes they're inexplicable. We need to be ready. One of the earliest martyrs for the Protestant faith was a Scotsman by the name of John Huss. When they informed Huss that he was to be burned at the stake, do you know what he did? He held his hand over an open flame at night to practice, to get himself ready for that final test of the fire. You know, we may not be able to predict the trials of our life, but I do believe we can prepare for them. I believe we can set ourselves up and be heads up, if you will, for the reality, the fact of trials. There must be a readiness for trials. Let me show you a second truth that I find here. Notice not only that there must be a readiness for trials, but notice number two, there must be a resolve through trials. There must be a resolve through trials. You know, the loss of a leader of a dynamic stature like John is usually enough to break up a little sect of disciples. Usually when a man like John dies, those who've surrounded him just sort of disappear and disband. But that's what I like about verse 12. I like verse 12 not necessarily because of what it does say, but more so because of what it does not say. Look at verse 12. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it. What an example. You see, there is no panic. There is no breaking down or breaking up. They just decide. They are resolved to do what has to be done. Even though it's difficult and even though it's hard, they are resolved. John's disciples teach us that even in the worst of times, even when it's the hairiest, as my grandma used to say, even when it's the hardest, we have to be decided, resolved that we're going to make it. We're going to endure. We're going to do what has to be done. Resolved that come what may, I'm going to do what has to be done. A resolve through trials. They illustrate to me a couple of things here about resolve. Let me show them to you. First of all, they illustrate this, a very simple truth. We can continue through our difficulties. If you don't get anything else I've said tonight, write that down somewhere and underline it. We can continue through our difficulties. Verse 12 does not say, and all John's disciples wrung their hands, argued a minute, disbanded, and left. It doesn't say John's disciples quit being disciples. John's disciples abandoned him. No. There was heartache. There was grief. There was questions. But do you know what there was not? There was no quit. There was no quit. Listen to this. Their difficulty could not change their devotion. Did you hear what I just said? Their difficulty could not change their devotion. God help us. When it hits the fan and things are going wrong, what happens? So many times we begin to question God. We begin to say things like, well, I don't even know if it's worth it, preacher. I don't think I'll be coming on Sunday night anymore. You know, if God's not going to be any better than this. No, their difficulty couldn't change their devotion. They weren't going to quit on their master, even when it seemed impractical, even when it seemed illogical. They just kept going. They continued through their difficulties. Have you ever wanted to quit? bunch of self-righteous Baptists. I have. I've wanted to quit. My daddy has been a pastor for my entire life. Some 30 years plus, even before I was born, he's pastored. I've seen the many multiplied Mondays he's wanted to quit. I'm telling you, all of us have wanted to quit. I'm sure John's disciples wanted to quit, but here's a good truth for you. Listen, there's a vast difference in wanting to quit and being a quitter. There's a chasm of difference in wishing to give up and actually giving up. John's disciples, though they may have wanted to quit, did not quit. They were resolved to continue through their difficulties. An author by the name of Irving Stone spent his entire life studying great men. He wrote biographies, numerous biographies of men who changed the world, who impacted society. As he studied the lives of these great men, he found a common thread that sort of bound their existence. He described it this way. Listen to what he said. He said, they're beaten over the head, knocked down, vilified, and for years they get nowhere. But every time they're knocked down, they stand up. You cannot destroy these people. Isn't that great? Listen to me. Great Christians are not made in the absence of trials. They're made in the endurance of trials. The great Christians are not the ones who never have any difficulties. The great Christians are the ones who rise and stand in spite of their difficulties. The righteous man falleth 7 times, but he rises again. It's those who continue in their difficulties that are resolved. You see, tonight we're talking about John's disciples for one reason. They just kept going. They're notable for no other reason other than their resolve. They wouldn't quit. They teach us that we can continue through our difficulties. Friend, you don't have to wave the white flag. You don't have to give up. Do you understand, by God's grace and through the strength that He provides, you can continue even through your difficulties. We see their resolve. I see something else. Not only that we can continue through our difficulties, they teach us this second truth, and a very important one. We can carry on our duties. Don't miss this. Not only can we continue through our difficulties, but we can carry on our duties. What was going on that day as John's disciples wrapped that lifeless, blood-stained corpse and prepared it for burial? In your mind, think about that. What was happening as they slowly and tenderly lowered that decapitated body into the ground and began to throw dirt upon his body? What were they doing? The answer is simple. They were still serving their master. Don't miss that. They were still serving their master. They were carrying out the duties that they had committed to the one that they loved. Here's the point. John's death did not derail their service. No matter how strong the tide against them, they were determined, we're going to do what disciples do. We're going to serve our master. Oh, so many times when God's people are faced with tragedies and trials, they throw their hands up and say, Pastor, I just can't do it anymore. I'm going to have to give up children's church. Until I get over this problem, until I get through this storm, I'm just going to have to back off the greeters ministry. Preacher, I'm going to have to back off my tithes till the money starts coming in. There's a foolish notion. I'm going to have to do this, and I'm going to have to give up my duties because I just can't do it in all that I'm facing. Oh, God help us. John's disciples teach us, even in the face of immense adversity, you can carry on your duties. Don't drop your sword. Don't set down your trowel. God is not through with you. In fact, the fact that you're in a trial signifies God is at work in a greater degree in your life than He's ever been before. Don't give up now. Don't quit now. Don't give up on your duties now. God is using you. Oh, Sunday school teacher, I know you're hurting, but don't stop teaching the people of God. Dear deacon, I know it gets hard sometimes, but don't stop serving the flock. Dear preacher, I know you get weary, and I know sometimes you feel like Moses. You say, God, why'd you give me this crowd? But don't give up. Don't stop doing what God's called you to do. Preach on. You can carry on your duties, even in the face of adversity. Dear mother, I know that nobody understands what you're facing. I got that. But don't you stop. Don't quit praying for that